I remember the sound of the coins first. That's the thing about memory, it doesn't give you the symphony, it gives you the scrap metal. We were at that bodega on 4th, the one where the fluorescent lights hum at a frequency that makes your teeth ache. I was standing behind him, clutching a carton of almond milk that was sweating through my palm. He was counting change. Most people just dump a fistful of silver onto the counter and let the clerk sort it out, but he was meticulous. He was lining them up, quarters, dimes, nickels. His fingers were long, slightly calloused at the tips, guitar strings or manual labor, I couldn't tell then, and he moved with a deliberate, agonizing slowness. I should have been annoyed. I was late for a rehearsal I didn't want to go to, in a city that felt like it was trying to swallow me whole. But as I watched him count, the air in the bodega stopped moving. It didn't just go still, it thickened. It became the kind of atmosphere you find at the bottom of the ocean, heavy, pressurized, and silent. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who was tired of being tired. He wore a charcoal coat that had seen too many winters, and there was a faint scent of cedar and old paper clinging to him. When he finally reached into his pocket for the last penny, his shoulder brushed mine. It wasn't a spark. Sparks are cheap, they go out. This was a grounding. It was the feeling of a lightning rod finally finding the earth. I looked at the back of his neck, at the way his hair curled slightly over his collar, and I felt a terrifying sense of recognition. I didn't know his name, but I knew the weight of his shadow. I felt safe in it before I even knew what I was being protected from. He turned around then. He didn't smile. He just looked at me, his eyes a fractured sort of hazel, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. I wasn't falling in love. I was falling into a gravity I hadn't realized was pulling at me my entire life. The air changed the second the door chimed. I didn't need to turn around to know the room was different. I was focused on the coins. $12.84. It was a pathetic amount to be so careful with, but when you're living in the margins, the math is the only thing that stays true. I was counting them out because if I didn't, I'd have to look at the clerk, and if I looked at the clerk, I'd see the reflection of a man who was failing. Then she was there. She was standing too close, but I didn't want her to move. She smelled like rain on hot asphalt and something sweet, lilies, maybe, or a perfume that had faded hours ago. I could hear her breathing. It was shallow, jagged, like she was holding back a secret or a scream. I reached for a nickel and my arm grazed hers. The contact was tectonic. I felt it in my marrow. My first thought wasn't who is she? It was oh no. Because I knew, with the cold certainty of a man watching a storm roll in over the plains, that my life had just become infinitely more complicated. Up until that moment, I only had to carry myself. Now there was this girl with the sweating milk carton and the wide, haunted eyes, and I could feel the weight of her settling into my bones. Responsibility is a physical thing. It's a pressure in the chest. I turned to look at her, intending to apologize for taking so long, but the words died in my throat. She was looking at me like I was a map and she was lost. She looked fragile, but it was the kind of fragility you see in a high-tension wire. If you touched it the wrong way, it wouldn't just break, it would snap and take everything down with it. I saw the way her coffee-to-go cup was already turning cold in her other hand, neglected. She was the kind of person who forgot the world when something caught her eye. "You're short a nickel," the clerk said, his voice grating like sandpaper. I didn't even look at the counter. I just kept looking at her. Before I could reach back into my pocket, she reached forward. She didn't say a word. She just placed a single, warm penny on the counter to round out the math. Our fingers didn't touch that time, but they might as well have been fused together. I didn't want to leave the bodega. I knew that the moment I walked out that door, the physics of falling would take over, and there would be no way to stop the descent. I saw him struggling with the last of the change, his hands trembling just enough to be human. I reached out and put a penny down. It was a bridge. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I'd help him carry whatever he was counting. I thought I was being his grace. She put a penny on the counter. It felt like a debt I'd never be able to repay. She saw the hole in my pocket before I could stitch it up. I didn't see it as grace. I saw it as the first piece of myself I was going to have to give away to keep her standing. The first few months were like a slow-motion film of an explosion, a beauty impossible to grasp while it's still happening. Mark became my geography. I studied him as if I were preparing for an exam on which my very life depended. I knew he took his coffee black but always left the last sip at the bottom of the mug, like a silent offering to the gods of misfortune. I knew he counted the steps as we climbed up to my apartment, and that his fingers always searched for my hand in the darkness of a movie theater, as if I were his only tether to reality. But then, the gold began to wash away. The light in our shared living room turned static, gray, like an old television set that had lost its signal. It started with small things. He began to linger. Not at work, he didn't really have a steady job then, just freelance gigs that brought more frustration than money. He lingered within himself. I'd find him sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m, staring out the window at the empty street, his shoulders looking as though a heavy concrete slab had been laid across them. I would come up behind him, resting my chin on his shoulder, trying to be the light breeze that would scatter those clouds. I whispered that everything would be okay, that we would manage. I hid the bills that started piling up in the mailbox. I took extra shifts at the theater, working until I was hollowed out, just so he could paint or write, or simply breathe in peace. I thought I was protecting him. I thought if I became a strong enough wall, the world outside wouldn't reach him. I watched him grow pale, saw a glass barrier forming in his eyes, and I only gripped his hand tighter. I didn't notice that my grip was leaving bruises on his wrists. I was so busy trying to keep him from falling that I didn't realize he had already been plummeting into an abyss for a long time, and I was just falling right along with him, calling it a rescue. She began to disappear right before my eyes. Not physically, Alice was there, she was everywhere. Her scent, a mixture of powder and anxiety, filled every corner of our apartment. But she stopped seeing me. She looked through me, at the Mark she had invented that day in the bodega. At the hero who needed help, the project that needed to be fixed. My silence wasn't a sickness. It was exhaustion. The fatigue of not being able to give her the life she deserved. Every time she brought home another meal bought with money from her overtime shifts, I felt something die inside me. It was a debt that couldn't be repaid with currency. It was an emotional loan with interest so high that I had pawned my soul just to pay the rent. I saw her hiding the letters from me. She thought I didn't know about the debts. She thought I didn't see her counting pennies in her wallet when she thought I was asleep. Her protection was a cage to me. She built a fortress of kindness around me but forgot to leave a door. I was suffocating in her love. The world turned gray. The golden glow of our first dates was replaced by the color of cold iron. I wanted to scream, "Stop saving me. Just be with me." But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was, "I'm not hungry," or "I'm going for a walk." She took my withdrawal as a sign that she needed to try even harder. It was a vicious cycle. The more she gave, the less of me there was left to receive it. I watched her leave her coffee to get cold on the table, rushing to comfort me after another one of my silent bouts of melancholy. That cold cup became the symbol of our life, once hot and full, now just sitting there, covered in a film of indifference that we were both too afraid to break. I cooked his favorite pasta. Candles, soft music, I was trying to bring us back to that June when we could talk until dawn. He sat across from me, and I saw him staring into the candle flame. I touched his hand, wanting to tell him I was here, that I would fix everything. He flinched as if I were white-hot iron. I felt my heart skip a beat. I do everything for him, yet he just slips through my fingers like sand. She lit those damn candles again. She put on another performance of The Happy Life, while we both knew the bank account was empty. When she touched my hand, I didn't feel warmth, I felt pressure. It was the touch of a guard checking to see if the prisoner was still there. She looked at me with such pity that I wanted to flip the table. She wasn't saving me, she was saving her idea of us. There is a specific kind of silence that exists in a house where someone is slowly disappearing. It's not the absence of sound, it's a heavy, vibrating hum, like the air right before a transformer blows. I became a professional at navigating that silence. I learned how to close the dishwasher without a click, how to walk on the balls of my feet to avoid the creaky floorboards near the study, and how to swallow my own news, good or bad, because the room was already too full of his shadows to fit anything of mine. I had become a ghost while I was still very much alive. My life was a series of rituals designed to keep the world from intruding on him. Every morning, I would watch him from the doorway. He would be slumped over his desk, his skin the color of parched parchment, his eyes fixed on some point 3 inches past the wall. The guilt was a physical weight in my stomach. I was the reason the light had left his eyes, or at least, that's what I told myself. I had tried to carry him, but in doing so, I had turned him into a passenger in his own life. I felt like a spectator at my own funeral. I would look at him and see the man from the bodega, the one who counted his change with such beautiful precision, but that man was buried under layers of static. I reached for him, but my hands just passed through the cold air he left in his wake. I was tired, so tired that my bones felt like they were made of lead, yet I couldn't stop. If I stopped being the caretaker, who would he be? And more terrifyingly, who would I be? I started leaving the lights off in the hallway. It felt more honest that way. We were two specters haunting a life we no longer knew how to live. I would sit in the dark, watching the red glow of the oven clock, waiting for a sign that he was still in there somewhere. But all I heard was the sound of my own heart, beating too fast for a room so still. Mark. My hands are the first things I notice every morning. They are tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a day of hard labor, but a deep, structural fatigue, as if the bones themselves are weary of holding up my skin. They tremble when I try to hold a pen, so I've stopped trying. I just sit and watch them. They look like the hands of a much older man, scarred by small, forgotten accidents, the knuckles swollen with the cold that seems to live inside this apartment now. Alice moves through the rooms like a mercy killer. I hear her trying to be quiet, and every muffled footstep is a scream in my ears. Her kindness is a physical assault. Every time she sets a glass of water down next to me, or drapes a blanket over my shoulders, I feel the world collapsing a little further. She is trying to hold up the sky, and all I can do is watch her spine bend under the pressure. The quiet screams are the worst. They happen in the middle of the afternoon when the sun hits the dust motes in the air. I want to tell her to run. I want to tell her that I am a sinking ship, and she is drowning because she refused to let go of the railing. But my voice is gone. It's been replaced by a thick, gray wool that fills my throat. I've become a burden, a localized weather system of misery that she insists on walking through without an umbrella. I see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hair has lost its luster because she's too busy worrying about the state of my soul to remember her own body. I am the ghost, but she is the one who is fading. I am a lead weight tied to her ankle, and the most devastating part is that she thinks she's the one keeping me afloat. I look at my hands and I realize I don't recognize them anymore. They don't belong to a man who can protect someone. They belong to a man who is being dismantled, piece by piece, by a love that doesn't know when to give up. Alice, I saw him standing in the hallway, staring at a framed photo of us from the first summer. He looked so fragile, like a house of cards in a high wind. I walked up and wrapped my arms around his waist, squeezing tight, trying to fuse my strength into his spine. I wanted him to feel that I wasn't going anywhere. I thought I was holding him together. Mark, I was looking at the photo, trying to remember the man in the picture, when she tackled me from behind. That's what it felt like, a tackle. Her arms were like iron bands around my chest, squeezing the little air I had left out of my lungs. She was clinging to me with a desperation that felt like drowning. I stood there, stiff and frozen, waiting for her to realize she was hugging a corpse. She thought she was holding me together. I felt like she was crushing what was left of my ribs. Alice. The truth didn't arrive with a scream. It arrived with a manila envelope. I had been hiding it for 6 months, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the mounting debt that bought us another few weeks of normalcy. I had become a master of the invisible architecture of lies. I knew how to forge a smile that looked like the real thing, how to hide the pill bottles behind the vintage tea tins he never opened, and how to rewrite our history in my head so I was the hero of the story instead of a woman playing God with someone else's fate. I thought I was saving him from the horror of knowing. I thought that if I absorbed all the fear, if I became the sole vessel for the news that my body was failing, he could remain whole. I wanted him to keep being the man who counted coins, not the man who counted the remaining breaths of his wife. I was exhausted. My skin felt too tight for my bones, and my thoughts were a tangled mess of medical jargon and insurance claims. I was drowning in my own mercy. When I walked into the kitchen and saw the papers spread out on the table, the real bills, the pathology reports I thought I'd burned, my first instinct wasn't fear. It was a strange, cold relief. The weight was finally going to be shared. But when I looked at Mark's face, I didn't see a man ready to help me carry the load. I saw a man who looked like I had just set his world on fire. "How long?" he asked. His voice was a thin wire, vibrating with a frequency that threatened to shatter everything in the room. I tried to reach for him. "I did it for you, Mark. I didn't want you to have to live in the dark with me. I wanted you to have one more summer of being happy." But the words felt hollow as soon as they left my lips. I saw the way he looked at me, not with love, but with the horror of someone who realizes they've been living in a house built of glass while I was outside throwing stones. I thought I was protecting his peace. He saw it as the ultimate betrayal of his agency. "Mark. I am a detective in a house of ghosts, and I finally found the body." For months, I felt the shift. I felt the way the air thinned when she walked into a room, the way she looked at me with a pity so sharp it drew blood. I thought I was the one who was broken. I thought my depression was a black hole swallowing our life, and I hated myself for it. I lived in a state of constant, low-grade shame because I couldn't be the man she needed. And then I found the envelope. It wasn't a secret debt or a hidden affair. It was worse. It was a medical diagnosis that explained why she had been working 3 jobs, why she had been losing weight, why she had been treating me like a porcelain doll instead of a partner. She had stolen my right to grieve with her. She had turned me into a child, someone too weak to handle the reality of our own lives. The confrontation felt like an autopsy of our souls. I was screaming, but not about the illness. I was screaming about the months of stolen truth. "You didn't protect me, Alice. You erased me." She stood there, looking so small, so fragile, and all I could feel was a towering, righteous rage. I saw her hands trembling, the same hands that had been tucking me in and feeding me while she was dying inside, and instead of wanting to hold them, I wanted to run. Because if she could hide this, what else was a lie? Was the love real, or was that just another part of the protection she provided? We were standing 3 feet apart, but we were shouting across a canyon that no bridge could ever cross. I heard her say she loved me, but what I heard was that she didn't trust me. She heard me say I was angry, but what she heard was that I didn't care she was sick. It was a dialogue of the deaf, a collision of 2 people who had spent so much time trying to be enough for each other that they had forgotten how to be honest. The twist was the most painful part. As we stood there in the wreckage of our secrets, I realized that I would have traded every happy moment she gave me for 1 minute of the terrible truth. She thought she was giving me a gift. She was actually taking away my last chance to be her husband. "Alice," I told him, "I just wanted you to be happy." I meant that I loved him enough to bear the pain alone so he wouldn't have to. I thought he would see the sacrifice. I thought he would understand that my silence was a form of devotion. When he yelled at me, I felt like he was slapping me for trying to save his life. "Mark," she said, "I just wanted you to be happy." What I heard was, I didn't think you were strong enough to handle the truth. It felt like a verdict. It felt like she had decided I was a burden before I ever became one. When I yelled at her, I wasn't attacking her. I was trying to break through the wall of mercy she had built between us. I was fighting for the right to suffer by her side. Mark. The crisis is over, or so the machines tell us. The numbers on the screens have stabilized, the debt has been restructured through a series of desperate, morally gray negotiations I had to make while Alice was sedated, and the immediate threat of the end has retreated into the shadows. We are safe. We are alive. But when I look at my reflection in the hospital glass, I don't see the man from the bodega anymore. I see someone who had to break himself to keep her whole. To save us, I had to become something I didn't recognize. I had to beg people I despised, sell things that weren't just objects but pieces of my history, and carry a level of cold, calculating ruthlessness just to navigate the bureaucracy of her survival. I did it without blinking. I did it because the alternative was a world without her breath in it. But now that the dust has settled, I realize that the hero is just a story people tell to make the sacrifice feel clean. It wasn't clean. It was a dirty, desperate scramble that left me feeling hollowed out, like an old tree that's been struck by lightning, standing but dead at the core. I sit by her bed and watch her sleep. Her color is returning. The ghost is leaving her, but I feel it moving into me. I am no longer the man she needs to protect, but I am also no longer the man she fell in love with. I am a stranger wearing her lover's face, a version of Mark that is made of scar tissue and silence. I saved her, but in doing so, I had to burn down the house we lived in. We are standing in the ashes, and I don't know how to tell her that the price of her life was the version of me she liked best. Alice. I am healed, or at least, the doctors say I am in management. The physical weight has lifted, I can breathe without feeling like my ribs are a cage. I should be ecstatic. I should be celebrating this second chance, this miracle that everyone keeps talking about. But every time I look at Mark, I feel a different kind of sickness, a heavy, sinking realization that I am looking at a man who gave away his soul to buy me more time. He moves differently now. His grounded, observational nature has turned into a guarded, distant vigilance. He watches me not with the gaze of a lover, but with the weary eyes of a soldier who hasn't realized the war is over. I see the toll in the way he handles his coffee. He doesn't even leave the last sip anymore. He drinks it all down like it's medicine he hates. I see it in the way he counts his change now, not with meticulous beauty, but with a frantic, sharp edge, as if he's afraid it will disappear if he stops looking at it. The realization is a slow poison. I am healthy, but he is broken because of it. My mercy, my silence, my attempt to play God, it forced him into a position where he had to destroy himself to catch me. I look at the man who saved me, and I realize I don't know how to talk to him. Every time I try to say thank you, the words die in my throat because thank you feels like an insult to the magnitude of what he's lost. We are two people who survived a shipwreck, but we lost the map that showed us how to get home. He is no longer my shadow, he is a dark room I'm afraid to enter. I am the reason for the lines on his face, and the coldness in his touch. I got my life back, but I lost the person I wanted to spend it with. Mark, I took her for a walk in the park, the first one since the surgery. I held her arm, not because she needed it, but because I needed to make sure she was still solid, still real. I felt like a ghost walking a living woman. I watched her look at the trees with such wonder, and I felt nothing but a crushing envy. She got to come back. I stayed in the dark. I felt like I was guarding a treasure I no longer had the right to enjoy. Alice, we walked through the park, and for the first time in a year, I felt the sun on my face without feeling the shadow of the envelope. I reached for Mark's hand, wanting to share the beauty of the moment, but his hand was cold, unresponsive. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the quiet screams in his eyes. He wasn't walking with me, he was patrolling. I realized then that while I had stepped out of the hospital, he was still trapped in the waiting room of my life. Alice. We live in a plateau now. It's a quiet, high-altitude place where the air is thin but clear. The hospital bills are settled, the physical scars have faded into silver threads against my skin, and the house is no longer haunted by the smell of antiseptic. But we are not the people we were in that bodega. We are something else, something harder, more deliberate. I've started to see our relationship like that bowl Mark brought home last week. It was shattered during our move, broken into a dozen jagged pieces. Instead of throwing it away, he spent 3 days meticulously gluing it back together with gold-dusted epoxy. The cracks are still there, you can run your finger over them and feel every break, every trauma the clay endured. But the bowl is stronger now. It has a history. It doesn't pretend it was never broken. That is us. We are held together by gold-filled cracks. I've stopped trying to fix him. I realized that my desire to protect him was just another way of trying to control the world so I wouldn't have to feel afraid. Now, I just let him be. When he sits in silence, I don't rush to fill it with nervous chatter. I just sit near him, letting my warmth be enough. I've learned that devotion isn't about preventing the fall, it's about being there to help pick up the pieces, even if your own hands are shaking. Mark. There is a peace in the aftermath that I didn't expect. It's not the bright, loud happiness of the early days, but a steady, muted resilience. I still carry the weight of what I had to do to save us, but it doesn't feel like a secret anymore. It's just a part of the landscape. Alice looks at me now with eyes that see everything. There are no more envelopes hidden in tea tins, no more fake smiles designed to spare my feelings. We trade in the hard currency of the truth now, and though it's heavier, it doesn't lose its value. I've started painting again. Not the grand, sweeping landscapes I used to dream of, but small, intimate studies of light hitting broken things. I watch her leave her coffee to get cold sometimes, and instead of rushing to warm it or feeling a pang of anxiety, I just smile. It's a part of her, the way she gets lost in a thought, the way she forgets the world when she's alive in a moment. I don't need her to be perfect. I just need her to be here. Love isn't a circle, a perfect, unbroken loop. It's a scar. It's the mark left behind after the wound has closed. It's proof that you survived something. We are a map of everywhere we've been hurt, and for the first time, I think that's beautiful. The final monologue, a dual voice. Alice, they say love is a light that never goes out. Mark, but I think it's the shadow that stays when the light is too bright to bear. Alice, we spent so much time trying to be each other's sanctuary. Mark, that we forgot we were both just looking for a place to bleed. Alice, I don't want the version of you that is unbroken anymore. Mark, and I don't want the version of you that I have to save. Alice, I want the gold in the cracks. Mark, I want the truth in the wreckage. Alice, we are not who we were. Mark, we are who we chose to become when everything else fell away. Alice, devotion isn't a feeling. Mark, it's a decision made every morning in a cold kitchen. Alice, it's counting the change and realizing you finally have enough. Mark, it's looking at the scar and remembering the pulse. We finally found the truth, but we lost the people who needed to hear it. Subscribe, like, and tell people about this love.